Never look them in the eye, never touch them, and for God's sake, never speak unless spoken to, her manager hissed as Barbara Davis stepped into the marble fortress, masquerading as a New Jersey estate. At 22, she'd worked enough bad shifts to know when a job felt wrong, but her mother's funeral bills didn't care about instinct. The gala shimmered with danger, disguised as elegance. Men in Italian suits worth more than her yearly rent. Women whose jewelry could buy her silence forever. The Musto family's annual gathering, where business was conducted in whispers and blood. Barbara's silver tray trembled slightly as she navigated the crowd, keeping her gaze fixed on the ornate floor tiles. She'd memorized the rules: invisible, silent, forgettable. Triple pay meant triple risk, but she was 3 months behind on everything that mattered. The room's energy shifted like a storm front moving in. Jeffrey Musto entered, the 80-year-old Sicilian patriarch leaning on his son Bart's arm, his breathing labored, but his presence absolute. Every conversation died. Every head bowed slightly. Barbara stepped back, into the shadows. That's when her heel caught the rug's edge, and she collided directly into the old man's chest. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm responding to everyone. Click subscribe, like this video. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Let's begin. The silver tray hit the marble with a sound like a gunshot in a cathedral. Barbara's world collapsed into a single horrifying moment. Her body lurched forward, champagne flutes tumbling through the air in slow motion, their contents arcing like crystal rain. Her hand shot out instinctively to catch herself, fingers closing around expensive fabric, and she realized with dawning horror that she was gripping the sleeve of Jeffrey Musto's jacket. The old man stumbled. Just slightly. But in this room, among these people, it might as well have been an assassination attempt. Time stopped. 300 guests froze mid-conversation, mid-gesture, mid-breath. The string quartet's violins died on a discordant note. Even the chandeliers seemed to stop swaying, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. Barbara felt the heat of a dozen bodyguard stares boring into her skull. Somewhere to her left, she heard the distinct sound of a safety being clicked off. Her manager's face had gone the color of spoiled milk, his mouth forming silent prayers or curses, she couldn't tell which. But it was the man beside Jeffrey who truly terrified her. Bart Musto was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 20s. With dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a Renaissance painting, if not for the modern menace in his eyes. Tattoos crept up from his collar, intricate patterns that spoke of old traditions and new violence. His hand had moved to his father's elbow, steadying the old man with practiced ease, but his gaze had locked onto Barbara like a sniper acquiring a target. Those eyes were black coffee and winter midnight, assessing her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not angry yet. Worse, curious. "I'm sorry," Barbara whispered, the words barely audible over the thundering of her own heartbeat. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." Jeffrey Musto raised his free hand, silencing her. The old man's breathing was labored, each inhale a visible effort, but his eyes were sharp as they studied her face. He looked exhausted, worn down by time and burden, and something in Barbara's chest twisted with unexpected recognition. She'd seen that same weariness in her mother's face during those final months. Without thinking, without calculating the consequences, Barbara did something that would later seem insane. She reached out and gently straightened Jeffrey's collar, the gesture automatic, maternal, the same way she'd helped her mother when the treatments had left her too weak to manage the small dignities. And then, in a voice barely above a breath, words rose from some buried place in her memory, syllables her mother had sung to her in childhood, a lullaby she'd never questioned. "Perdonatemi, patri, pilufisa chi non voglia fare. Benedicitemi, si e lu rispetto è sacro." Forgive me, Father, for the offense I did not mean to make. Bless me, for respect is sacred. The words rolled off her tongue in a dialect that tasted like olive groves and ancient stone, like secrets buried in Sicilian soil for generations. She didn't even know what she was saying, not really. Just sounds her mother had taught her, pretty music she'd never questioned. Jeffrey Musto's crystal tumbler slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the marble, the crack echoing through the silence like the breaking of a spell or the opening of a tomb. The old man's face transformed. Color drained from his weathered cheeks. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words in the same dialect, but no voice emerged. His hand rose, trembling, reaching toward Barbara's face as if she were a ghost made flesh. "Impossibile," he breathed. "Id die morta. Tutti moriru." Impossible. She's dead. They all died. Bart's entire body went rigid beside his father. Barbara watched his expression shift through a dozen calculations in the space of a heartbeat. Confusion, recognition, shock, and then something darker. Something that looked like hunger wrapped in suspicion. "Who are you?" Bart's voice cut through the silence like a blade, low and dangerous, and absolutely commanding. Not Italian-American accent, pure Brooklyn steel. "What's your name?" "Barbara." Her voice cracked. "Barbara Davis. I'm just a waitress." "I'm nobody. You're not nobody." Bart stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and Barbara's breath caught as she realized how tall he was, how completely he could block out the rest of the room. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with controlled strength. Not painful, but inescapable. Nobody speaks the vecchia lingua anymore. Nobody. That dialect died 50 years ago in a village that doesn't exist on any map. His thumb pressed against her racing pulse, and his eyes narrowed. "So I'll ask you again, and this time, I want the truth." His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her, intimate and threatening in equal measure. "Who the hell are you really?" The library smelled like leather and old secrets, the kind of room where confessions were extracted and judgments rendered. Barbara sat in a wingback chair that felt more like a throne of accusation, her waitress uniform suddenly too tight, too obvious, too much of a lie she hadn't known she was telling. Bart paced in front of the fireplace like a caged wolf, his jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal more of those intricate tattoos. Sicilian symbols, she realized now. Protection marks, family crests, the kind of ink that meant something beyond decoration. Jeffrey Musto had been settled into the chair opposite her, his breathing still labored, but his eyes never left her face. He looked at her the way people looked at miracles or catastrophes, something that shouldn't exist but did anyway. 2 bodyguards flanked the door. Not to keep people out, Barbara understood with cold clarity. To keep her in, start from the beginning. Bart stopped pacing, positioning himself behind his father's chair, one hand resting protectively on the old man's shoulder. "Your mother. What was her name?" "Sarah." Barbara's throat felt like sandpaper. "Sarah Davis. She died 3 months ago. Cancer." "Sarah Davis." Bart repeated the name like he was testing it for truth, rolling it around in his mouth, finding it wanting. "And before she was Sarah Davis?" "I don't know." The words came out smaller than she intended. "She never talked about her life before I was born. Said the past was dead and buried, and we should leave it that way." "Convenient." Bart's voice dripped with skepticism, but something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Jeffrey raised a trembling hand, and Bart immediately fell silent, that casual gesture holding more authority than any shouted command. The old man leaned forward, his voice rasping like dried leaves. "Demi lu nomu completo figia." "Tell me her full name, daughter." The Sicilian words washed over Barbara, and she understood them. Not because she'd studied the language, but because they lived somewhere deep in her bones, in the cadence her mother had used during bedtime stories, in the songs that had filled their tiny apartment on nights when the loneliness got too heavy. "I only know Sarah," Barbara insisted, but her voice wavered. "She worked 3 jobs. We lived in a studio in Newark. She never talked about family, never mentioned Sicily, never explained why she'd wake up screaming sometimes with names I didn't recognize." "What names?" Bart's question came sharp as a knife. Barbara's hands twisted in her lap. "Veritas." She'd scream Veritas, and then cry until morning. The word hit the room like a grenade. Jeffrey's entire body shuddered. A sound escaped him, half gasp, half sob, and his weathered hands came up to cover his face. His shoulders shook with the kind of grief that had been locked away for decades, finally finding release. Bart's expression transformed into something Barbara couldn't read. Shock, rage, grief, maybe all 3 at once. His hand tightened on his father's shoulder, knuckles going white. "Patri," he said softly, that single word carrying volumes of questions. Jeffrey lowered his hands, and Barbara was startled to see tears streaming down his creased face. Real tears. The kind that couldn't be faked or performed. The old man reached out across the space between them, his hand shaking as it hovered in the air between them. "Ida," Jeffrey whispered, his voice breaking. "Ea figlia di Caterina. Hayu listisi occhi. La stessa manera di Tucarimi. Como si fossi Caterina tornata di l'aldila." It's her. It's Caterina's daughter. She has the same eyes. The same way of touching me. As if Caterina returned from the afterlife. Barbara felt the ground shift beneath her. "Who's Caterina?" "Your mother." Bart's voice had gone quiet, deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded storms. "Your mother's real name was Caterina Veritas. She was the daughter of my father's business partner, Antonio Veritas. She was also supposed to be dead." The room tilted. Barbara gripped the arms of her chair, her mind racing through memories that suddenly held new weight. Her mother's paranoia, the way they'd moved apartments every 2 years, the strict rules about never having their picture taken, never filling out school forms completely, never ever talking to strangers about family. She wasn't running from nothing, Barbara breathed. She was running from you, not from us. Jeffrey's English was heavily accented but clear, each word measured and deliberate. We would have protected her. We tried to protect her. His hand finally reached Barbara's, gnarled fingers closing around hers with surprising strength. From them, from the families who wanted the Veritas line erased, who wanted to erase any challenge to our legitimacy. I don't understand any of this. Barbara tried to pull her hand back, but Jeffrey held firm, not forceful, but desperate. I'm a waitress. I serve coffee and clean tables and worry about rent. I'm nobody important. You're the last Veritas. Bart moved around the chair, crouching down so he was eye level with her, and Barbara found herself drowning in those dark eyes again. You're the living heir to half the Musto empire. The treaties, the land deeds, the offshore accounts, they all require Veritas blood to access. Without you, everything my father built sits frozen. He paused, his jaw tightening. And every family from here to Palermo will be coming to kill you the second they realize you exist. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building Barbara had only ever seen from street level, the kind of address that appeared in magazines under headlines about Manhattan's elite. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting, lights stretching to every horizon, and for a disorienting moment Barbara felt like she was floating above the world rather than trapped within it. Because trapped was exactly what she was, despite the luxury. Your room is through here. The woman who'd introduced herself as Maria, no last name, just Maria, gestured toward a bedroom that was larger than Barbara's entire former apartment. Mr. Musto had clothes brought in. Your size. If anything doesn't fit, let me know. Barbara stood in the center of the main living area, still wearing her stained waitress uniform, her mind struggling to process the last 3 hours. The convoy of black SUVs, the underground parking garage entrance, the private elevator that required both a key card and a fingerprint. The 2 armed guards now stationed outside the penthouse door. For her safety, they kept saying. For her protection, it felt like a velvet prison. I need to go home, Barbara said, hearing the desperation creep into her voice. I have work tomorrow. My manager will fire me if I don't show up. I have bills. Rent is due in a week. I can't just... Your apartment was cleared out 2 hours ago. Bart emerged from what looked like a home office, tablet in hand, his tie loosened, but his presence still commanding every inch of space. Everything's in storage. Your landlord has been paid through the end of your lease. Your jobs have been notified. You won't be returning. The words hit like physical blows. You had no right. I had every right. He set the tablet down on the marble counter with deliberate care, his movements controlled, but Barbara could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. 3 different families have informants in the catering company you worked for tonight. By morning, your face, your name, and your address would have been on every hit list from here to Sicily. So you just decided to erase my life? Barbara's voice rose, anger finally cutting through the shock. Without asking. Without even giving me a choice. The choice was already made the second you spoke that dialect. Bart moved closer, and Barbara forced herself not to step back. You think this is about what I want? I've spent the last 3 hours calling in every favor, activating every protection protocol we have. Do you understand what you are? You're not just some waitress anymore. You're a key to a vault that's been locked for 30 years. He pulled out his phone, swiped through screens, then turned it toward her. Barbara's stomach dropped. Her face stared back at her from what looked like an internal criminal database, red flags and markers surrounding her image like a target. That's the Lucchese family's intelligence network, posted 1 hour ago. He swiped again. Genovese, posted 40 minutes ago. Another swipe. And this is from the Russians, because apparently everyone wants a piece of the Veritas legacy. Each image showed her face, her details, estimates of her location. Some included bounty numbers that made Barbara's vision blur. How much? Her voice came out as a whisper. For you alive and talking? Bart's expression hardened. 5 million. Dead? 2 million. Because even your corpse proves the Veritas line ends, which is almost as valuable as the information you carry. Barbara sank onto the nearest couch, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. This couldn't be real. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether she could pick up an extra shift to cover her mother's remaining medical bills. Now strangers were bidding on her life, like she was livestock. I don't carry any information, she said desperately. I don't know anything about accounts or land deeds, or whatever else you think I have. My mother sang me lullabies. That's it. Those lullabies are codes. Bart sat down across from her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been sympathy flicker across his features. The old families embedded their secrets in songs, in prayers, in phrases that sounded like folklore. Your mother taught you the verbal keys without you even knowing it. Somewhere in your memory are the access codes to offshore accounts worth hundreds of millions. Property deeds to Sicilian estates. Names of informants and allies that haven't been spoken aloud in decades. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, suddenly looking less like a crime boss and more like a man carrying impossible weight. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you didn't ask for any of this. His voice softened, just slightly, but your mother kept you hidden for 22 years for a reason. She knew what would happen if anyone discovered you. Now they have, and the only thing standing between you and a bullet is me. Barbara looked around the pristine penthouse, at the designer furniture and the million-dollar view, at Maria hovering discreetly in the background and Bart watching her with those impossible dark eyes. A golden cage was still a cage. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? How long until I can have my life back? The pause before Bart answered told her everything she needed to know. You can't, he said finally. That life ended tonight. The question now is what kind of life you're going to build to replace it. The study was all dark wood and older secrets, maps of Sicily covering one wall like a history lesson Barbara had never asked for. Bart stood in front of them now, backlit by the desk lamp, his shadow stretching across provinces and coastlines that had existed long before either of them were born. Barbara had barely slept. The penthouse guest room had been too quiet, too soft, every sound making her jump. She'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering if her mother had spent 22 years doing the same thing, always waiting for the past to catch up. Now dawn light was beginning to creep across the Manhattan skyline, and Bart had summoned her to understand why she could never go home. In 1974, my grandfather and your grandfather were partners. Bart's finger traced a line across the map, landing on a small village in the Sicilian interior. Not equals, partners. The Mustos had the muscle, the connections, the reputation. The Veritas family had something more valuable. They had legitimacy. He turned to face her, and Barbara noticed the exhaustion etched around his eyes. He'd been up all night too, she realized. Fielding calls, arranging protection, probably preventing her death a dozen times over while she'd been staring at the ceiling. Your family were the original landowners. Titles going back to the Norman conquest. They weren't criminals. They were aristocracy. Minor aristocracy, but enough that when they vouched for the Mustos, doors opened that would have stayed locked forever. Bart moved to the desk, pulling out a leather-bound ledger that looked older than both of them combined. The partnership was supposed to last forever, bound by blood, by oath, by contracts written in the old ways. He opened the ledger, and Barbara saw names written in careful script, dates spanning decades, signatures in ink that had faded to brown. What happened? She asked, though part of her didn't want to know. The Lucchese family happened. Bart's voice went cold, the kind of cold that came with old hate. They wanted what we had. The shipping routes, the political connections, the legitimate business fronts. But they couldn't just take it, not while the Veritas family guaranteed our standing. So they decided to remove the guarantee. He pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, the headline in Italian. Barbara couldn't read it, but the photograph was clear enough. A burned-out villa. Body bags being carried away. August 15th, 1995. The Festival of the Assumption. Bart's jaw tightened. The entire Veritas family was supposed to be at their ancestral estate for the celebration. Your grandfather Antonio, your grandmother, uncles, aunts, cousins. 23 people. Barbara's chest constricted. Supposed to be? Your mother wasn't there. She was 19, studying in Rome, and she'd gotten into some argument with your grandfather about wanting to stay in the city with friends. Bart's expression shifted, something that might have been respect. Saved her life. The Lucchese family sent a team. They burned the villa to the ground, with everyone inside. No survivors. No bodies that could be properly identified. Just ash and bone. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. Barbara gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. My father was in New York when it happened. By the time he got to Sicily, there was nothing left to save. Just your mother, hysterical and alone, the last living Veritas. Bart moved closer, his presence somehow both threatening and protective. He tried to bring her back here, to keep her safe, but she ran. She didn't trust anyone. Didn't believe he wasn't involved. She disappeared into the wind, and despite every resource we had, we never found her. Because she became someone else, Barbara whispered. She became Sarah Davis. Smart woman, your mother. She knew the Lucchese family would keep hunting, as long as they thought she was alive. So she died. Completely. No trail, no records, no trace. She rebuilt herself from nothing. Bart's voice held something that might have been admiration. And she kept you hidden for 22 years. Never used the dialect where anyone could hear. Never went back to New York, or anywhere near the old neighborhoods. Never gave you any reason to question where you came from. He opened another file, and Barbara saw surveillance photos. Recent ones. Her apartment building. The diner where she'd worked. Her walking to the subway. The Lucchese family has been watching the catering company for years, looking for opportunities. When you showed up at that gala, speaking that dialect, looking exactly like your mother did at your age, Bart shook his head. You lit up every radar from here to Palermo. Why do they still care? Barbara's voice cracked. It's been 30 years. What difference does one person make? Because the treaties still exist. The land deeds, the offshore accounts, the business contracts. They all require Veritas approval to access or dissolve. Without you, everything stays frozen. My father can't sell property, can't access certain accounts, can't make deals that require the old authorization. Bart's eyes locked onto hers. But the Lucchese family figured out a loophole. If the Veritas line ends completely, if there's no one left to claim the legacy, then the contracts become void. Everything defaults to the Mustos, and then they can challenge our legitimacy, our holdings, everything. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, and for a moment he looked less like a crime boss, and more like a man carrying the weight of generations. You're not just a person to them, Barbara. You're the final piece of a 30-year plan. They kill you, the Veritas line ends, and they can finally take everything they've wanted since 1995. Barbara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. So what am I supposed to do? Hide in this penthouse forever? Live in a golden cage until someone finally gets lucky? No. Bart's voice went hard, determined. You learn to fight back. The cafe was supposed to be safe, Bart had assured her. A small Italian place in the West Village. Family-owned, swept for bugs twice daily, sightlines controlled. Barbara sat across from him at an outdoor table, pushing pasta around her plate while trying to remember how to be a normal person having a normal lunch. 3 days in the penthouse had left her restless and hollow. She'd agreed to this outing partly because Bart insisted she needed to maintain some semblance of normalcy, and partly because she was going stir-crazy staring at those floor-to-ceiling windows. You need to eat, Bart said, his own plate barely touched. Even here, even in this supposedly controlled environment, his eyes never stopped moving. Scanning faces, tracking movements, cataloging threats that Barbara couldn't see but were apparently everywhere. I'm not hungry. Barbara set down her fork, the pretense too exhausting to maintain. How do you live like this? Always watching, always waiting for something to go wrong. You learn. His attention shifted back to her, and something in his expression softened fractionally. Or you don't survive long enough for it to matter. Barbara opened her mouth to respond when Bart's entire demeanor changed. It happened so fast she almost missed it. The way his eyes caught on something in the distance, the split-second calculation that flashed across his face, the instant he understood what was about to happen. Down! He lunged across the table, his body slamming into hers with enough force to knock her chair backwards. They hit the ground hard, Bart's weight crushing the air from her lungs, his arms wrapped around her head in a protective cage. The world exploded. The first bullet shattered the window behind them, glass raining down like deadly snow. The second punched through the table where Barbara's head had been moments before, splinters erupting in a violent spray. People screamed. Someone's espresso cup shattered against the pavement, the sound oddly distinct amid the chaos. Bart was moving before Barbara's brain could process what was happening, dragging her behind an overturned table while reaching inside his jacket. His gun appeared smooth as breathing, natural as a prayer, and he fired 3 shots toward a building across the street without seeming to aim. Stay down! His voice cut through her shock, commanding and absolute. Hands on your head. Don't move. Don't look up. Barbara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely follow the instruction, pressing her palms against her skull while her heart tried to beat through her ribcage. This was real. Someone had just tried to kill her. Would have killed her if Bart hadn't moved when he did. More gunfire. Not from Bart this time. His security team materializing from positions Barbara hadn't known they were holding. Car doors slamming, tires squealing. The organized chaos of a protection detail executing emergency protocols they'd clearly rehearsed 1,000 times. Then Bart's hands were on her, pulling her up, half carrying her toward a black SUV that had appeared at the curb. She caught a glimpse of the cafe, tables overturned, civilians cowering, a waiter with blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. Collateral damage from a bullet meant for her. The SUV's door slammed shut, armored and heavy, cutting off the outside world. Bart shoved her down onto the floor, covering her body with his own again as the vehicle accelerated hard enough to throw them both sideways. Report. Bart barked into a radio that had appeared in his hand. Sniper on the roof of the brownstone, 4 o'clock. 2 spotters on street level, all 3 rabbited when we returned fire. The voice crackling back was professionally calm, like they were discussing weather rather than attempted murder. Swept the positions, found shell casings. 308 Winchester. Professional setup. Barbara couldn't stop shaking. Her fingers dug into the floor mat, her breath coming in shallow gasps that might become screams if she wasn't careful. Bart's weight on her back was the only thing that felt real, the only anchor keeping her from flying apart completely. "Are you hit?" His voice was suddenly close to her ear, urgent but controlled. "Barbara, look at me. Are you hurt?" She managed to shake her head, not trusting her voice. "Check anyway." He shifted enough to run his hands over her arms, her back, searching for wounds with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Sometimes you don't feel it at first. Adrenaline masks the pain, but there was no blood. The only damage was the destruction of her last illusion of safety. The SUV took a corner hard enough to make her stomach lurch, and Barbara finally found her voice. "How did they find us?" "I don't know." Bart's tone carried something she hadn't heard before. Anger, yes, but underneath it, worry. This location was cleared. Limited distribution. Someone either got very lucky or... He stopped himself, jaw clenching. Or what? Or someone told them where we'd be. The implication hung in the air between them, heavy and poisonous. A mole. Someone inside Bart's organization, someone with access to his security protocols, had sold her location to people who wanted her dead. The SUV finally slowed, turning into what looked like an underground parking structure. More security, more armed guards, the same routine of protected spaces and controlled environments, except now Barbara understood how fragile that protection really was. Bart climbed off her, offering his hand. Barbara took it, letting him pull her up onto the seat. Her legs felt like water, her whole body vibrating with leftover adrenaline and delayed terror. "I can't do this," she heard herself say. "I can't just wait around to be shot. I can't live knowing any moment could be." "Then stop waiting." Bart's eyes locked onto hers, dark and intense and completely serious. "Stop being the victim. I'll teach you to fight back." Barbara looked down at her hands, still trembling, still useless. Then she thought about the waiter's blood, the shattered glass, the bullet hole where her head had been. Her mother had run for 22 years and still died afraid. "When do we start?" Barbara asked. The boxes arrived at the penthouse 3 days after the shooting, stacked against the wall of Barbara's room like archaeological artifacts from a life that felt centuries old rather than weeks. Her entire existence reduced to 12 cardboard containers marked with her former address in permanent marker. Barbara had been avoiding them. Opening those boxes meant confronting the person she used to be, the daughter of a woman who'd lied about everything that mattered. But the sleepless nights were getting worse, and Bart's intensive training sessions left her body aching in new ways. She needed something familiar, something that connected her to the mother she thought she'd known. The first few boxes held exactly what she expected. Worn clothes that smelled like the lavender sachets her mother had always tucked into drawers. Kitchen items from their cramped apartment. Books with broken spines and margins filled with her mother's handwriting. Small, ordinary things that belonged to Sarah Davis, waitress and single mother who'd never wanted to talk about the past. The photo albums came in box 7. Barbara sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, pulling out the cheap drugstore albums her mother had maintained with meticulous care. Pictures of Barbara's childhood, first day of school, birthday parties, Halloween costumes. Always just the two of them. Never any extended family. Never the same apartment twice. Never anything that might anchor them to a specific place or time. She was about to close the album when she noticed the spine felt wrong. Thicker than it should be. Her fingers traced the edge, finding a seam that had been carefully glued shut and reopened multiple times, the adhesive worn thin from years of use. Barbara's heart began to pound as she worked her fingernail under the fabric covering. The spine gave way, revealing a hollow space barely wider than her thumb. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, was a small leather journal no bigger than her palm. The cover was expensive, real leather worn soft with age and handling. No title, no identifying marks, just a brass clasp that opened with a soft click. Barbara's hands trembled as she opened to the first page. The handwriting was her mother's, but younger, more confident. The script of a girl who hadn't yet learned to hide. August 10th, 1995. My last day of freedom, though I don't know it yet. Barbara's breath caught. 5 days before the fire. 5 days before everything ended. She turned the page, and her mother's voice reached across decades in death to tell the truth Sarah Davis had buried. "Papa is furious with me for wanting to stay in Rome. He says family is everything, that missing the festival is a disgrace to the Veritas name. But I'm 19 and stupid and in love with a boy who doesn't matter, and I think traditions are just old men's ways of controlling young women. If I'd known it was the last time I'd hear his voice, I would have gone home." The entries became frantic after that, chronicling the horror of the fire, the devastation of loss, the crushing weight of being the sole survivor. But then, 3 months later, the tone shifted. November 3rd, 1995. Jeffrey Musto came to see me today. I pulled a knife on him. I was certain he'd ordered the hit, certain the Mustos had decided they didn't need the Veritas family anymore. But he just stood there, this powerful man, and let me scream. Let me threaten him. And then he showed me the photographs. Barbara turned the page with shaking hands. The Lucchese family did it. Jeffrey had proof. Surveillance photos, financial records, intercepted communications. They'd been planning it for months. The Mustos had discovered the plot only 2 days before the festival, but they were too late. Jeffrey sent his own men to try to evacuate the villa, but the Lucchese hit team arrived first. He showed me pictures of 3 dead Musto soldiers, killed trying to breach the villa's gates. One of them was his nephew, 24 years old, died trying to save my family. I've spent 3 months hating the wrong people. The entries that followed painted a picture Barbara had never imagined. Jeffrey Musto begging Katerina to accept protection, to come to New York, to let him honor the partnership her father had died believing in. Katerina refusing, too traumatized to trust anyone, too afraid that getting close to the Mustos would just paint another target on her back. December 20th, 1995. Jeffrey came again. He brought Antonio's signet ring, the one Papa never took off. The one that should have burned with his body. Jeffrey's men recovered it from the ruins, and he's kept it safe all this time, waiting to give it to me. He wept when he placed it in my hand. This man who commands armies of criminals, who makes politicians tremble, sat in my tiny apartment and cried for my father like they were brothers. Maybe they were. Barbara reached up and touched the silver chain around her neck, the one her mother had given her on her 16th birthday. The small ring that hung from it, too large for her fingers, engraved with symbols she'd never questioned. Her grandfather's ring, the proof of everything her mother had tried to forget. January 8th, 1996. I'm leaving tonight. Jeffrey doesn't know. I can't stay here, can't be Katerina Veritas anymore. The Lucchese family will never stop hunting me, and I won't let the Mustos sacrifice any more people trying to keep me alive. I'm going to disappear, become someone else. Live a small, quiet life where no one knows my name or my blood or what I'm worth. Jeffrey will be angry. He'll search for me. But eventually he'll understand. This is the only way to keep everyone safe. Someday if I'm brave enough, if I find someone worth trusting with the truth, maybe I'll have a daughter. And I'll teach her the old words, the old songs, without telling her what they mean. A key she doesn't know she's carrying. Insurance, in case the world ever needs the Veritas family to exist again. The final entry was dated 3 months before her mother's death, written in the shaking hand of someone too weak to hold a pen properly. Barbara is everything I hoped she'd be. Smart, kind, stronger than she knows. I pray she never needs the keys I've given her. I pray she lives her whole life as Sarah Davis's daughter, and never has to become Katerina's. But if you're reading this, my darling girl, then something has gone wrong. Then the past has found you, and you need to know the truth. Jeffrey Musto is not your enemy. He was your grandfather's true brother. Trust him. Trust his son. They will die before they let you come to harm. I'm sorry I ran. Sorry I let fear steal 30 years from both our families. Sorry you have to bear this burden alone. But you are Veritas, and we do not break. Barbara closed the journal, tears streaming down her face, the ring burning against her chest like absolution. Her mother hadn't been running from the Mustos. She'd been running from herself. Barbara found Bart in his study at 2 in the morning, the journal clutched against her chest like a shield. He looked up from whatever late-night crisis commanded his attention, and the careful mask he always wore slipped when he saw her face. She knew, Barbara said, her voice raw from crying. My mother knew you didn't betray them. She knew, and she ran anyway. Bart stood slowly, coming around the desk, and for once he didn't look like a crime boss or a killer. He looked like a man who understood the weight of inherited guilt, of sins that weren't his but became his responsibility anyway. May I? He gestured to the journal. Barbara handed it over, watching his face as he read. His jaw tightened with each page, something that might have been grief or anger or relief flickering across his features. When he reached the final entry, his hand came up to cover his mouth, and he was quiet for a long moment. My father never stopped looking for her, he said finally. Even when everyone else said she was dead, he kept searching. He blamed himself for not finding her before you were born, for not being there when she got sick. Bart's voice went rough. He's going to want to see this. Tomorrow, Barbara said. Let him sleep tonight. They stood in the half-darkness of the study, the city lights creating shadows that made the moment feel suspended, separate from everything that came before or after. Bart reached out, his hand hovering near her face like he was afraid she might break. Before his fingers finally brushed away, a tear she hadn't realized was still falling. You're not alone in this anymore, he said quietly. You understand that now? Barbara nodded, not trusting her voice. His hand lingered against her cheek, warm and solid and real, and something shifted between them. something that had been building since the first moment their eyes met across a shattered silver tray. The study door opened. "Boss, we've got a situation." Marco Rossini stopped mid-sentence, taking in the scene with his perpetually calculating eyes. Bart's second in command, the man who'd been by his side for 15 years, who knew every secret and controlled every operation. Bart stepped back from Barbara immediately, the professional mask slamming back into place. "What situation?" "Lucchese movements on the waterfront. Looks like they're mobilizing for something big." Marco's attention slid to Barbara, lingering just a fraction too long. "Thought you'd want to handle it personally." Something felt wrong. Barbara couldn't explain it, couldn't point to anything specific, but her mother's paranoia had apparently embedded itself in her DNA. The way Marco looked at her, the timing of the interruption, the slight tension in his shoulders that didn't match his casual tone. "Give me 5 minutes," Bart said. "Pull the team together." Marco nodded and withdrew, but not before his eyes met Barbara's one more time. A look that lasted a heartbeat too long, that carried something she couldn't quite name. Bart was already moving, checking his gun, grabbing his jacket. "Stay in the penthouse. Don't open the door for anyone except Maria. I'll have 3 guards outside. I want to come with you." The words surprised Barbara as much as they surprised him. "Absolutely not. You've had 3 days of training, Barbara. I'm tired of hiding." She stood straighter, channeling something her mother had written. "We do not break. You said I needed to learn to fight. How can I learn if you lock me away every time there's danger?" Bart's expression shifted through a dozen arguments before settling on reluctant acceptance. "You stay in the vehicle. You don't get out for any reason. You do exactly what the security team tells you, when they tell you." "Understood?" Barbara nodded, adrenaline already flooding her system. The drive to the waterfront took 20 minutes through empty streets, 3 SUVs moving in formation. Barbara sat beside Bart in the middle vehicle, watching the city transform from corporate glass to industrial decay. Warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, and the Hudson River reflected city lights in oil-slick patterns. They pulled into a shipyard that looked abandoned, rusted containers stacked like a maze. Bart's radio crackled with position reports, his team spreading out to investigate Marco's intelligence. That's when Barbara saw it. A reflection in the side mirror. Marco 50 yards back, his phone pressed to his ear, his lips moving in urgent conversation, his hand gesturing in signals that looked practiced, coordinated. And then his eyes met hers in the mirror. He knew she'd seen him. Everything happened in the span of a heartbeat. Marco's hand dropped to his weapon. Bart was already turning, instinct screaming warnings his conscious mind hadn't processed yet. Barbara opened her mouth to shout a warning. The flashbang grenade came through the window. The world exploded into white light and deafening sound, senses obliterated, balance destroyed. Barbara felt hands grabbing her, dragging her from the vehicle. She tried to fight, tried to remember the defense moves Bart had drilled into her, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Her ears rang like cathedral bells, her vision nothing but dancing stars. Shouting, gunfire, Bart's voice roaring her name, then a cloth pressed over her face, chemical sweet and suffocating. Barbara's last conscious thought was seeing Marco's face above her, his expression almost apologetic. "Nothing personal, princess," he said, his voice echoing from somewhere far away. "But 5 million buys a lot of forgiveness." The darkness swallowed her whole, and when Barbara woke, she was somewhere that smelled like salt water and rust and death. Heavy chains wrapped her wrists. Industrial lights swung overhead. And standing before her, smiling like a shark that had finally caught its prey, was a man whose face she recognized from Bart's intelligence files. Vincent Lucchese, the man who'd murdered her family 30 years ago. "Welcome home, little Veritas," he said. "We've been waiting a very long time for you." Barbara's head throbbed where it had struck something during the kidnapping. Her wrist burned from the industrial chains bolted to the concrete floor, but her mind had never been clearer. Terror had a way of sharpening focus, turning survival from abstract concept into immediate imperative. Vincent Lucchese circled her like a predator, savoring the hunt's conclusion. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of expensive suit that made violence look like a business transaction. 3 of his men flanked the warehouse space, muscle with dead eyes and weapons worn like accessories. "You look just like her," Vincent said, tilting his head with something that might have been nostalgia or regret. "Katerina. Same eyes, same defiant little chin. She looked at me exactly like that right before the villa burned." Barbara's stomach turned, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Showing fear now would be like bleeding in shark-infested waters. "Marco sent photographs, but I didn't believe it." Vincent crouched down to her level, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of tobacco and old violence. "The last Veritas, serving champagne in a waitress uniform. Your mother was smarter than we gave her credit for." What do you want? Barbara's voice came out stronger than she felt. The same thing I've wanted for 30 years. The codes. The account numbers. The property deeds. He pulled out a knife, not threatening yet, just letting her see it. Your mother embedded them in those pretty little lullabies. Songs about flowers and saints and the old country, each one a key to a fortune. You're going to sing them for me. And if I don't remember them? Vincent's smile was colder than the concrete beneath her. Then we'll try various methods of memory enhancement until you do. I'm patient. We have all the time in the world. He stood, gesturing to his men, and Barbara's pulse spiked with panic. She had maybe seconds before this escalated into something she couldn't come back from. Her training with Bart had been focused on physical defense, but her mother had given her a different kind of weapon. One these men couldn't see coming. Aspettati patri, Barbara said quietly, the old dialect flowing from her tongue like water finding its course. Wait, father. The room went still. Vincent froze mid-step, his back to her, shoulders suddenly rigid. Prima cafai, le rudi ca nun poi cancellari. Before you make the mistake, you cannot undo. Vincent turned slowly. His expression shifted from confidence to something more complex. Recognition. And beneath it, uncertainty. Where did you learn that phrase? His voice had lost its casual menace. Barbara forced herself to look confused, innocent. I don't know. My mother used to say it. Why? What does it mean? But she knew exactly what it meant. She'd spent days since finding the journal, working through her mother's lullabies, pulling apart the words, understanding the layers beneath. That particular phrase was one of the old codes, a warning used between families when negotiations were about to break down. A signal that spoke of ancient protocols these men had probably forgotten but couldn't ignore. Vincent's eyes narrowed. What else did she teach you? Barbara rattled off another phrase, this one a greeting reserved for equals conducting formal business. Then another, a blessing given between heads of families before treaty signings. She watched Vincent's face as each phrase landed, watched the calculations running behind his eyes. Who is she? One of the men asked in Italian, his weapon lowering slightly. She speaks like the old blood, like the council. She's nobody, Vincent snapped, but his certainty was cracking. She's just a... Lo rispetto a prima legge, Barbara interrupted, her voice carrying authority she didn't know she possessed. Siu l'ignora paga siu lu sangu. Respect is the first law. Who ignores it pays with blood. That phrase was older than the Mafia itself, dating back to codes established when Sicily was still under feudal rule. Her mother's journal had explained it. Words so sacred that even criminals treated them like gospel. Speaking them meant claiming status, invoking protections that transcended simple gang warfare. The three guards exchanged glances, and Barbara saw the doubt spreading like infection. Who was this girl who spoke words their grandfathers barely remembered? What if killing her violated protocols that still carried weight in the old families? She's playing you, Vincent said, but there was an edge of desperation in his voice now. She's just repeating phrases she doesn't understand. Sugnu effigia di Caterina Veritas, Barbara said clearly, meeting each man's eyes in turn. Niputi di Antonio Veritas, custodi di la parola antica. I am the daughter of Caterina Veritas, granddaughter of Antonio Veritas, keeper of the ancient word. She paused, then delivered the line her mother had written in the journal, with instructions to use only in the most desperate circumstances. E si uspargilume sangu sangu di tutti l'antichi patti. And who spills my blood, spills the blood of all ancient pacts. It was a curse, essentially. A declaration that her death would invalidate every treaty, every agreement, every carefully negotiated peace that had been sealed with Veritas witness over the last century. True or not, the words carried enough weight that even hardened killers hesitated. The warehouse filled with heavy silence. One of the guards holstered his weapon, his face pale. Another took a step back, his hand moving to make what looked like a warding gesture. Vincent's phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered it with a snarl, listened for 3 seconds, then his face went white. How many? He demanded. Another pause. All of them? That's not possible, Marco said. The warehouse's metal door exploded inward with a sound like the end of the world. Bart came through the smoke like an avenging angel, his weapon up, his face a mask of controlled fury that promised violence in its purest form. Behind him, a team of operators moved with military precision, flooding the space, cutting off exits, eliminating threats with the efficiency of a machine designed for exactly this purpose. Down, one of Lucchese's men tried to grab Barbara as a shield, but she'd been watching, waiting, learning. She dropped her weight exactly as Bart had taught her, making herself dead weight, and drove her head backward into the man's groin. He doubled over with a scream, and she was rolling away, chains and all, getting clear of the firing line. The gunfight lasted maybe 20 seconds. Bart's team had the advantages of surprise, numbers, and righteous anger. When it ended, Vincent Lucchese was on his knees with 3 red laser dots painting his chest, and his men were either dead or down. Bart crossed the warehouse in long strides, dropping beside Barbara. His hands were shaking as he worked the chain's locks with a key his team had brought, and when her wrists finally came free, he pulled her against his chest hard enough to hurt. "You terrified me," he said into her hair, his voice rough. "When I realized Marco had sold you, when I couldn't find you." "I'm okay." Barbara's hands fisted in his jacket, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "I bought time. I used the dialect like I heard." He pulled back enough to look at her face, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Pride, respect, and beneath it, something deeper that neither of them had time to name. The whole building was wired. "I heard every word. You magnificent, brilliant, terrifying woman." Behind them, Vincent Lucchese laughed, the sound bitter and broken. 30 years. 30 years hunting ghosts, and she walks in speaking like the old kings. He looked at Barbara with something that might have been admiration. "Your mother taught you well, little Veritas. Even from the grave she wins." Bart stood, pulling Barbara up with him, keeping her behind him as he faced Vincent. "You're done. Your organization, your territory, your protection. All of it ends tonight." Then ended. Vincent's smile was the grin of a man with nothing left to lose. "But know this, Musto. She's marked now. Every family heard what she said. They'll come, not to kill her, but to claim her. To use her. The Veritas heir isn't just a threat anymore, she's a prize." Barbara stepped out from behind Bart, her chin raised, her mother's voice echoing in her memory. "We do not break. Let them come," she said quietly. "I'm done running." The Musto estate's grand hall looked different in daylight. The same marble floors where Barbara had dropped a silver tray now reflected morning sun through windows that overlooked manicured grounds stretching toward the Jersey Hills. 6 weeks had passed since the warehouse. 6 weeks of systematic dismantling, of careful negotiations, of watching Bart methodically erase the Lucchese family's existence from every corner of their shared world. Marco Rossini's body had been found in the Hudson 3 days after his betrayal, though Bart never confirmed his involvement. Some questions didn't need answers. Now representatives from 8 families sat around the table that had been set in the hall's center. Not the full council, that would take months to convene properly, but enough power brokers to matter. Men and women whose names appeared in FBI files and Forbes lists with equal frequency, who moved billions with handshakes and ended lives with nods. Barbara stood beside Bart at the head of the table, wearing a tailored suit that Maria had commissioned from a Sicilian designer who specialized in clothing that made statements. Charcoal gray, cut precisely to her frame, expensive enough to signal status without screaming wealth. Her mother's ring, her grandfather's ring, hung openly around her neck now, no longer hidden. Jeffrey Musto sat in a wheelchair nearby, oxygen tubes running to his nose, but his eyes were clear and sharp as they watched his son manage what he'd built. The old man had wept when Barbara had given him her mother's journal, had held it against his chest like a piece of his soul had been returned. "The Lucchese territories have been redistributed," Bart was saying, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone born to command. "The waterfront operations, the shipping contracts, the political connections, all dissolved or absorbed into existing family structures according to the old agreements." He placed a leather folder on the table, sliding it toward the center. "Except for these." Bart's hand came to rest on Barbara's lower back, a gesture of unity that didn't go unnoticed. 3 properties in Sicily, 2 shipping companies, and approximately 40 million in accounts that require Veritas authorization to access. These remain under Veritas control, as they always should have been. Anthony Genovese, a man whose gray beard and expensive watch projected the image of a businessman rather than the killer Barbara knew he was, leaned forward. "The Veritas line was broken 30 years ago. There are no existing claims to—" "There is one claim." Barbara's voice cut through the room, and she felt every eye turn toward her. 6 weeks ago, that attention would have made her want to disappear. Now she met it head-on. "I am Caterina's daughter. Antonio's granddaughter. The last living heir to the Veritas name and all it entails." "You're a waitress," someone muttered from the far end of the table. "I was a waitress." Barbara stepped forward, her hand moving to the ring at her throat. "I was also the daughter of a woman smart enough to disappear for 22 years. Who taught me the old codes without telling me what they meant. Who kept me alive through knowledge I didn't know I possessed." She looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. "My mother ran because she was 19, and traumatized and alone. I'm 22, and I'm none of those things." She pulled a document from inside her jacket, placing it on the table with deliberate care. This is the original treaty between the Musto and Veritas families, signed in 1974 by my grandfather and Jeffrey Musto. It stipulates that major decisions affecting both families' interests require consent from both bloodlines. Barbara's finger traced the signatures, faded but still binding. For 30 years, that consent has been absent. Now it's not. Maria Chen, who controlled most of the East Coast gambling operations through a network of legitimate businesses, studied Barbara with the kind of attention usually reserved for threat assessment. You're proposing to activate a treaty that's been dormant for 3 decades? To what end? Legitimacy. Bart's voice carried conviction. Barbara isn't just a symbol. She holds knowledge that authenticates our claims to territories the Lucchese family spent 30 years trying to contest. With her confirmation, those disputes end, permanently. And what does the Veritas heir want in exchange for this confirmation? Anthony's question held the weight of the real negotiation, the one everyone had been dancing around. Barbara looked at Bart, finding strength in the slight nod he gave her. They'd discussed this moment for hours, played out every scenario, anticipated every objection, but the final choice had always been hers. I want my family's seat restored, she said clearly. Not as a figurehead, not as Bart Musto's accessory or Jeffrey's charity case. I want full partnership in the Musto organization, with authority over the Veritas holdings and equal voice in decisions that affect both families. The room erupted in overlapping conversations, some angry, some disbelieving, some calculating the implications. Barbara let it wash over her, her spine straight, her expression calm. She'd learned from watching Bart that power wasn't about shouting. It was about knowing when your silence carried more weight than anyone else's words. Jeffrey's laugh cut through the chaos, rough and delighted. Ida è vera nipote di Antonio, he said, his Sicilian thick with emotion. Stessa testa dura, stessa coraggio. She's truly Antonio's granddaughter. Same hard head, same courage. Bart's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once. Not possessive, partnership. There's another option, he said into the settling quiet. Barbara could take her inheritance, approximately $70 million, and walk away. Start a new life, far from this world. Safe and comfortable and completely legitimate. His eyes held hers. I've had the papers drawn up. Everything she's entitled to, liquidated and transferred to accounts in her name only. She can leave today if she wants. No obligations. No threats. No chains. The offer hung in the air, genuine and binding. Barbara could see in his face that he meant it. That if she chose to leave, he would honor that choice even if it cost him everything her presence legitimized. She thought about her mother, hiding in studio apartments, working 3 jobs, dying afraid and alone because she'd chosen safety over legacy. She thought about the girl who'd been terrified to make eye contact, who'd believed being small was the same as being safe. That girl had died in a warehouse, chains on her wrists, speaking words that could shake foundations. I'm not going anywhere, Barbara said. This is my family's legacy. My grandfather's treaty, my mother's sacrifice, and my throne. She looked around the table, meeting each skeptical gaze with the certainty that had been building in her bones since the moment she'd spoken that first phrase, and watched a room full of killers freeze. The Veritas line isn't broken. It's returned, and anyone who has a problem with that can address it with both heads of this family. She glanced at Bart, seeing her own fierce determination reflected back. Together, Maria Chen was the first to incline her head, acknowledgement and acceptance. The old ways matter. If the girl speaks the truth, carries the blood, holds the knowledge, the treaty stands. One by one, the others followed. Some reluctant, some calculating future advantages, but all bound by the same ancient codes that had governed their world long before any of them were born. When the meeting ended and the hall emptied, Barbara found herself alone with Bart, beside the windows, where servants had once warned her never to look anyone in the eye. No going back now, he said quietly. You understand what you've chosen. This life, this world. It's beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I know. Barbara turned to face him, this man who'd saved her life, trained her to fight, offered her escape, and respected her choice to stay. My mother spent 22 years running from who she was. I'd rather spend the next 22 discovering who I can become. Bart's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone capable of such violence. Then let's build something worth the price we've paid, he said. Through the windows, Barbara could see the grounds where their future would unfold, complicated and dangerous and entirely theirs. She'd walked into this hall as a nobody, with a silver tray and empty pockets. She was walking out as a queen. Thanks for watching. Please like, comments, and subscribe.